There's a lot of stories that you hear in Stories from the Toolshed of just regular people experimenting with their everyday life and seeing God show up. This is a lot more than prayer tools, and it's really evidencing what a new way of living looks like. The confidence that we now have even when we don't know what's on the other side yet.
Everything that God has given you, He wants you to look right down at your feet, see the patch that you have right in front of you, and be Christ to your community, be Christ to your marriage, be Christ to your family, your kids, your neighborhood, your business, your work. It really is the invitation from the Lord to us is we have been equipped, we've been changed to be a change to those around us.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Stories from the Toolshed. I'm Tim.
I'm Steven.
So we want to welcome you guys back to our latest episode, as well as our final episode for Stories from the Toolshed. So it's our joy to be here with you again to share fresh stories about what God is doing and to also point you towards a new project that we're excited to tell you more about as well. So we have another guest joining us today who's actually going to be more like the facilitator of this podcast. Simeon Lorman from Chattanooga, Tennessee, has joined us and is going to be basically questioning Stephen and I, kind of our thoughts, responses to the Stories from the Toolshed podcast. And he's also the producer of the next project that we're working on together. So will you guys join me in welcoming Simeon to the call?
Hey, thanks guys. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Glad you're here, man.
Yeah, it's just excited to connect with you guys and just recognize that it's been several years since that last episode that you guys recorded. And, in preparation for this kind of wrap up episode, we all listened back on that and just reminding ourselves of what God was up to and what you guys, the conversation you guys were hosting several years ago, and just how relevant it is even still today, and even more so where God has been leading us. It's exciting to remind ourselves of all that's happened. So for you guys, as you think back, it's been several years since you started that podcast, Stories from the Toolshed. I'm just curious, what was your goal with that podcast? What was your hope? Obviously the episodes tie closely to the cohort training, but somebody that's listening through it, maybe even this is their first time listening to the project. What do you guys really hope that people are walking away with?
That's a great question. I'm going to say a bad word, something that everybody is so eager to forget, but I don't think we really can. Like the Stories from the Toolshed podcast came out of this desire to make the cohort experience a personal one when we were all kind of forced into this way less personal way of living during the pandemic and COVID. And so the big idea that how can we still share personal stories and give people this kind of more of an intimate experience doing the cohort by making it feel like tighter in more like kind of a more togetherness, because everyone was having to participate virtually and via Zoom. So there wasn't this in-person interaction that people were having. So we desired to share very personal stories with people that were left to participate virtually.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I'm reflecting on too is at the end of the last podcast, it was really this thought of, I have my own personal story of how I've used this prayer tool, but what's happening in Seattle? What's happening in Dallas, Oklahoma? Fill in the blank. And I think there is a power where each of us don't feel like we're siloed as we're practicing and experimenting with these prayer tools, but we're hearing, what is God doing in other communities? How is He using this prayer tool to transform other people's lives, but also their community and the people that they're practicing with?
That's really good, Stephen, because I think that's the other really cool thing that we wanted to express and that I think really happened was a lot of times when you're hearing someone else's story, it's very easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, that's Stephen's story, who lives this way, who has this, whatever, special anointing or this special gifting, and that's okay for him, but I'm just and then fill in the blank, whatever that is, an everyday person. I'm not a missionary. I'm not this, I'm not that. So when we focus and put stories out there of, the mom of 3 who's busy and has a chaotic life and is seeing Jesus minister to people in a carpool line, like that feels way more attainable, achievable. Someone just like me that's seeing God do incredible things around them. And gosh, I can do it too, because I can now hear from the Lord, and I'm practicing this way, and I'm more eager to take a step of faith because I see someone like me doing it too.
That's awesome.
That was our hope too, is we didn't want people to hear in these stories that they were professional ordained ministers of the gospel. We wanted it to be everyday Sues and Joes, right where they are, not where they need to be, not in the mission field. It was like, this is where I am today. This is what God has called me to, and this is where God wants to be present in my community.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a thing of barbecue, right? And it's what I have available, and I'm going to use it for the kingdom.
Yeah. Dave's story, like the Lord wants to bless what's already in your hands. And it's often not a new thing he's going to ask us to do. It's a new way of doing something we're already doing. That involves him, his kingdom, and getting to see that unfold in front of us just by saying yes before we have everything figured out. That's what I love about Dave's story. I'm thinking about, there's a lot of stories that you hear in stories from the Toolshed of just regular people experimenting with their everyday life and seeing God show up. And that to me is a really compelling reason just to continue to say yes and focus on not just prayer tools, right? This is a lot more than prayer tools, and it's really evidencing what a new way of living looks like when we're relying on God, when we're partnering with the confidence that we now have because we've put in some reps with some of these prayer tools, and we've developed a way of hearing from God, of responding to him, of moving in obedience, even when we don't know what's on the other side yet. But he's built a track record through us seeing him follow through faithfully in the risks that we've taken as we've felt prompted to do so.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of the stories are what happened in a moment, right? Because the cohort's so built on experiments and these lab experiences. And it's what happened in a moment that inspires us to live differently, because it happened in a moment and it was undeniable. And so what is the implication of that? I'm curious, can you guys think of 1 or 2 stories that you've experienced of the last few years where the cohort was not an end of itself, but it was the beginning of something new? And somebody said, okay, all these prayer tools, they mean something going forward. This wasn't just I completed a training, but this was actually the beginning of a new way of living. Do you have an example you might point to of somebody that embraced it with that kind of intention and purpose?
I mean, I can think of one right now of being in Portland, and the session was on physical healing. And there were three ladies that were there that are a part of a women's housing situation that they had come out of some hard stuff in life. And a friend of a friend invited them to come to a cohort. These are not believers. And we were teaching on physical healing as a prayer tool. And there was a lady in the back that was drawing a picture, because I guess I was pretty boring, and she's drawing this picture. And I felt like from the front, as we were praying and asking the Lord what he might want to do that night, I felt like someone had a pain in their wrist. And I shared that in faith. And this non-believer that was there in the cohort session, she said as soon as we shared that in the room, she was immediately healed. And the pain left her wrist, and her eyes were open to the reality that Jesus is real. And that night she gave her life to the Lord, all over drawing a picture in a cohort session as a non-believer through physical healing. And we got to minister to her as a body, as a cohort, and just seeing how God moves towards non-believers in a setting where we're just declaring who God is, but he moves toward them in love and compassion and wants a relationship with them. That's one story that comes to my mind.
I love that. Tim, do you have anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, for me, I love this story because it's just so normal, right? This is someone in Southern California, just going on a walk with their wife down to the local pier. Just like this is like absolute routine for them. And they had just gone through kind of the reclaiming spiritual territory. So kind of towards the end of the cohort where it's kind of reclaiming the land and inviting God's kingdom to show up and really asking the Lord to kind of renew the imagination of what things would be like if he was ruling and reigning here in this place today. And they were going by this kind of, I think it's a house, looks like a house, but it's really a witchcraft business. And they were just all of a sudden had this new intensity of just like, you know what, this shouldn't be here. And, and they took it upon themselves to, and the person in the story, he's like, I got down on my knees and I put my hands on the ground and just started declaring blessing in favor, in binding all of the effects of the enemy and telling it to get out of here. And, and the birds were still chirping and the sun was still out and there was a nice gentle breeze and, nothing shifted, right? Other than they had felt like this was a moment in time. They continued on their walk. They went down to the pier. And on their way back, they kind of traveled the same way home that they went down there. And all of a sudden, in the exact place where he had placed his hands on the ground, there was a for sale sign now dug into the ground, and the place was listed for sale. Literally, like a half an hour later, after this happened. And so it's just, to me, it's these little things. And this is one of the things I think we even said in this last episode is that miracles occur upon the death of coincidence. And to me, this is a really moment where we can either stand and say, well, gosh, that's too many things had to happen for that to be God. It must just be a coincidence. When in the reality is when you're praying with expectation, when you're inviting God to bring his kingdom on earth, you're actually not surprised, but there's a part of you that's like absolutely surprised and floored because like, holy smokes, we literally just asked for this. And God, inside of the time that we're living right now, he's solving this thing, but it's actually outside of the time because my prayer was 30 minutes ago, but I know the guy put the sign in his truck to start digging into the hole sometime earlier this morning. So God was working before we prayed, but our prayer came just in time for what God was prepared to do.
And how would you say that situation has produced lifestyle change for that couple? Like, how are they different now as a result of what God did and invited them into, would you say, from what you've seen?
Well, they've changed their careers and now they're realtors. No, just kidding. No, but it's these small things, small acts of obedience. Like they really precede or like big changes. Like it's a whole paradigm shift waiting to happen. Right. And this is kind of what the cohort does for a lot of people where it's, I used to see life one way. And now through partnering with God, I see my life, same job, same routine, same habits. I see it differently. Now, when I go on a walk with my wife, we're enjoying each other's company and we're enjoying what the Lord might invite us into. And so I know that this couple has story after story. They've become greater partners with their local church and leading other people. They've begun hosting cohorts in their home, and they've had dozens and dozens of people now similarly be activated to what God is doing in their midst and partnering with them, as a result of little things like this. And so the Lord puts these stories. I have my set of stories too, which are the things that I go back to just say, God, on one side, it's God, do it again, with this belief that I actually know you're going to. I actually know that it's just right around the corner. And this is to excite in me the expectation of what you're about to do. And I'm going to be able to witness, participate in, respond to. And then I know that I'm tooled up and resourced for the people that I get to serve and minister to and come alongside as well.
I love that because it speaks to the desire that rises up when you've seen God work and you can't unsee it, and you actually want other people to see it and experience it too. The same way that you did, the same way that he woke up something in you. And because I can sit here and I can see you guys, we can connect on this. I'm curious, if you're sitting across from somebody that's just finished the cohort, they're a recent graduate, like, what are you communicating to them? They've finished all the podcast episodes. They've been a great student. They've been doing the experiments. Like, what's your hope for somebody as they come out of this and they step into the next thing? It might be the next yes. Like, what do you really want for them?
I mean, I could tell you a real story. Last week, I had someone come up to me and said, I just finished the cohort and my life is forever changed. And what's next? And it started a conversation. I said, here's what's next. Everything that God has given you, he wants you to look right down at your feet, see the patch that you have right in front of you, and be Christ to your community, be Christ to your marriage, be Christ to your family, your kids, your neighborhood, your business, your work. And it sounds so simple, but it really is the invitation from the Lord to us is like, we have been equipped. We've been changed to be a change to those around us. And, I think a lot of us, including us on this podcast right now, it seems that the more we get mature, quote unquote, in the Lord, it gets simpler. If that's even a way to say it, it gets more in a more simple way. Faith is just expressed in my day-to-day life. It's like God is renewing our mind to what it means to listen and obey his voice. And I think that really is the expectation that we've tried to set like a platform in front of people of just saying like, could the cohorts be a place where people could encounter God, have change hearts, be equipped, have a new mindset of what it means to be in Christ, and then ultimately to be the change in their community where God has already called them.
Yeah, and I would probably add to that, like people are in different places as they're finishing the cohort. For some people, this is new enough, like they know that something significant has happened, but they can't quite put their finger on it yet. And that's where I was when I graduated the cohort the first time. And I knew that I needed it. I knew that I needed more. And, in through doing it again, what I started to realize was that I'll just give you the word picture that the Lord kind of just gave me for this. Is it's a little bit like our life is a stage, a platform, right? And the way that he said it to me was like, when you are on your stage, your life is all about you. And even as a believer, like this can still be the case. It's my life, it's my job, it's my family, it's my routine, my church. It's everything starts with a my. And through the cohort, what he said was, when I am on the stage of your life becomes all about them. It's their story. It's their witness. It's how your interaction with it, allowing me to have your stage, how that really just develops a whole new story. And that's kind of the best way. When I left the cohort, what I felt was the experiments, the lab time, the homework, all of the little bits that made me super awkward at the time, but led to these amazing stories. It was really me relinquishing control and getting off of the stage of my own life and allowing God to sit there and just minister to people. And it was terrifying at first, but as Stephen just said, like, it becomes more familiar, this ability to give over the platform of your life to Jesus and watch him minister perfectly in truth and love through what I love to say, the least likely of people, which is me. And so I still get to be involved with God on my platform and get to see him minister perfectly to people through an imperfect person, which is me. And so that would be my encouragement as people are graduating. It's this: start to see just how much you have given over for God to rule and reign in your life, in the amazing things that come out of it. It's a far greater way of living. It's a far different paradigm than the way I was living before. And I feel like it's so compelling to just give over your life to God and just watch him do amazing things through you for others.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of just the way that God created us from the very beginning was to walk with us in the garden, right? He wants to be with us. And the reality of walking through every day with the awareness that he's right here with me. And it's not about what I do for him or in his name and all the productivity of our Christian living, but the fact that with him next to us, side by side, every moment and every situation, environment looks different, altogether different. And I'll just say for those that are listening that don't want to be on a platform because, maybe you don't like the spotlight on you, that's okay because the spotlight's on Jesus, and that's really what we're saying here is that when we step out in faith and we embrace the opportunity that's in front of us because he happens to be side by side right with us, like the spotlight's on him, and that's an area of confidence that we can have, and not an area of fear or concern, because he's faithful and he shows up, and these stories again, they build our faith and they remind us again and again and again how God is showing up in everyday situations as we go about life, and he happens to be right there with us. And we get to participate in what it is that he's doing in that moment. So, Tim, could you just speak because a lot has changed for you in the last few years from when you guys first recorded this podcast to where you're at today? Could you just kind of speak a little bit from a spirit of celebration, right? What has changed for the cohorts? Like, how have you seen God, blessing this training and this unique way of equipping people to upgrade their prayer life?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I kind of got to start it back at the beginning because in the last 3 years, we've had a lot of life change, and so the host of the last episode, Tim Shuck of the last episode, was the president of a home building company in Seattle, Washington. That was kind of like, I don't know, supreme volunteer for Novo, just trying to help put the podcast together and volunteer and do all of these things. And as one thing has led to another, and one yes following Jesus has led to another thing. I actually am full time with Novo now, and I'm the director of the Spiritual Authority Cohorts. So that's a huge thing. We've moved. So many things have changed, and gosh, I mean, we don't have enough time to just say how many little things have changed. But the things that I want to celebrate, not just the fact that I've seen God do incredible things. Is just like the reach of the cohort has actually been really, it's just gotten bigger and bigger, to the point where we now know that over 50 different countries, there have been participants that have found the cohort and found that training useful in its spreading. We haven't quite nailed all 50 states yet, but we're in like the mid 40s as far as people participating from other states. And there are thousands of people that go through the cohort process every year. And one of the things I'm most proud of is when this whole experiment got started in 2015 with just, 20 guys at the Novo office, like the dream wasn't much beyond that. But what has happened is it's gone through this like Novo-led process to now it's that anybody can run a cohort. We've made it so easy for people to say yes to facilitating and hosting a cohort, whether it's in a home or at a business or at a church function or whatever. There's video presentations and ways that people can engage with this training, and the stories that come in by our involvement being less are the same level of stories where our involvement was high. And to me, that just shows that the Lord is doing this thing, and it's not through human hands. It's not through human efforts. It has very little to do with Novo outside of our job of listening and really feeling like the Lord said, give it away. So our focus is on giving this training or this, this package away so that people can similarly rely more on Jesus, similarly give him more credence in the forefront of their life to watch him do just amazing things through their simple acts of obedience. And so those are some of the things that I'm most excited about. It's not a numbers game. It's a reach thing, and it's people living differently and being the light, using their authority in their neighborhoods and seeing transformation happen in the same place that they were before. They saw things differently. So,
yeah. Stephen, is there anything from your standpoint that you want to celebrate just, as you look back and just recognize what God's done?
Yeah, I think the question of how does an experiment in an office become a global training that is now being translated in new languages and new ways, in new cultures, new ethnicities, new faces. It's like, it feels like the Lord has taken first place and we have stepped back and let him lead it. We've made it more simple to jump on and to say yes to Jesus. And I think the Lord honors that. I think because of just his leadership and how he's led this, I think more and more people have been able to discover their own spiritual authority in their own neighborhoods and patches. And yeah, I want to celebrate that. I see the fingerprints of God all over the globe now. But it all comes down to just faithful obedience of believers saying yes to Jesus day to day.
Well, in the spirit of kind of shifting from the remembering and celebrating of what has been, Tim, you alluded to in the beginning of our conversation, the what's next. And, we talk about this podcast that started recently, and even the what's next for people that are just finishing the cohort. Like, there's other trainings, there's other resources that have emerged in the last few years that have felt like so necessary. And again, like you just said, Stephen, like so led by the Lord to create and give away. Would you just maybe point us to a couple of those things that, the podcast where people can keep hearing stories, what that looks like, and then some of the other resources that are closely tied to all that the cohort is making available?
Yeah, well, we want to invite everyone who's been a listener of Stories from the Toolshed to a new podcast from Novo, which is just titled Called Beyond. And really, our aim with this new podcast is, it's actually really similar to our last episode. It's what happens when someone says yes to Jesus and their life and lifestyle starts to point that direction. And so what we get to do on this podcast is interview guests that have done nothing more than turn over their stage to Jesus and share about how their life has looked different as a result to that. So if you love hearing stories, if you love getting to celebrate ordinary people that get to see God do extraordinary things through just saying yes, then you are absolutely going to love Called Beyond. And so there's going to be a link down in the description for this podcast where you can just click on it and you can similarly listen to that on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And we just want to welcome you there. Stephen and I actually kick that podcast off as well. So there's some familiarity there. You'll get to hear Simeon's voice as well. And honestly, this first episode, it actually focuses on basically catching up on my story. And then we move and we hear from Amy and we hear from Kelsey and we hear from another amazing couple in episodes 4 and 5 and all the way on and on and on. So our goal for this podcast is just encouraging you to say yes to the next step that Jesus has in front of you. And that's what we want to welcome you into as a transfer from Stories from the Toolshed now to Called Beyond. We want to invite you over there. Stephen, what are some other ways that people can get involved, maybe post-cohort, in some next steps and next trainings?
Yeah, I think Called Beyond, we're going to continue these stories. We also have a movement pathway, which you might be asking, okay, how do I take these prayer tools with a group of people and kind of put it into the place of practice in my patch? And so movement pathway is a beautiful next step. We have many other resources, but I would say, yeah, check out our website, see what God's doing, stay continued in the God story that he's building within our Novo family. And that's one of the ways that stands out to me right now.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, like people are in different places as they finish up the cohort. So if you're the needing to do it again, folk, that's great. We want to invite you to do that, but not just do it on your own. we want to invite you to have people. The best way to learn something is to learn it in a way where you're actually giving it away as well. It actually does something in your neurochemistry where it cements it more and it becomes a greater reality. You kind of become a co-teacher in a lot of ways. And so we want to invite you to do that. And as Stephen mentioned, some people are just sort of like off like a rocket. Like, where has this been my whole life? Like, I am ready to go. I have been using my relationship mapping tool and I have just been seeing people. And I want to know, well, I don't want to just see my friends healed and Jesus touch their bodies. I want to see them come to faith. And I want to be able to have those conversations in like a real person-to-person way versus me having to memorize something that I'm, scared of saying the wrong thing. Like, how do I do life in community that is always leading people to Jesus? And the Movement Pathway is this fantastic training that partners with your creativity and where God already has you to see how he can engage people through the unique skills, talents, and gifts that he's given you to see people far from him become close to him. In Jesus' name.
Last thing I would say too is if you know someone that be blessed by the podcast and now Call Beyond, share that with others. Share these stories. Don't hold these stories to yourself. Who's that one person in your community that you know would be blessed by this? Just send them a text today and say, hey, you need to listen to this.
And honestly, like, we need to hear your stories too. And so the reality is God is doing amazing things through everyday, ordinary people. That's who I am. That's who Stephen is. That's who Simeon is. And in the great stories of God, the things that we read about in his word, if we were to just sit side by side with Peter, or sit side by side with James, or sit side by side with any of the heroes of our faith, they would say, I'm pretty sure I'm just an ordinary guy doing the best I possibly can to put one foot in front of the other, to follow Jesus and look at what he's been able to do through me, around me, with me. And part of me seeing Jesus today is getting to walk in step with him and watch him minister to other people. And through doing that, he's also ministering to me. Isn't that amazing?
Well, hopefully you guys have heard our heart, and first and foremost, that it's you guys would be close to Jesus. You'd be connected to God. You'd be growing in your relationship with God. We also desire that you be in community, that you find fellowship with other people that are on a similar journey of saying yes to Jesus, that you're not alone. You're not in isolation. Maybe that is in your church. Maybe it's in a relationship that's virtual. And, we're connecting again through the cohort and some of these trainings around the world, people that are in the same place you are, saying yes to Jesus, small obedience, step after step, and really raising the bar of expectation that God has more for their lives than they could ask or imagine. And so discovering that community, we want to help you say yes to Jesus. We want to help you discover the mission and place he's called you to. What is the opportunity around you? And so whether it's your own time alone with Jesus, what's your fellowship with one another, or it's the places he's calling you, we hope you'll stay with us in the spirit of storytelling and celebration, and join us for Called Beyond and maybe a training near you online or in your living room sometime soon.
So this is not goodbye. This is welcome to all that God has for you. Your next yes could lead you on the most exciting adventure with Jesus that you have ever had. So our encouragement is for you to stay connected. It's to stay engaged. It's to continue practicing even when someone isn't requiring it of you as homework. Like, this is a lifestyle. This is us surrendering our stage to Jesus and watching him do his amazing work in the people that we oftentimes are already connected with and in community with. And so I just want to bless you right now in Jesus' name to be curious, to say yes, to continue listening and to continue obeying. And I bless you just to know, even before you've experienced it, that Jesus shows up, that he ministers perfectly through imperfect people, and that you have exactly what you need to say the next yes to Jesus. So I just bless you as you walk into that, even if it's scary, that the Lord is with you. Be strong and courageous in Jesus' name.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, a production of Novo Mission, Inc. To learn more about Novo's commitment to multiply movements of the gospel and mobilize the church for that mission, we invite you to check us out on our website at novo.org or follow us at Novo Mission on Facebook or Instagram. The music in today's episode was written by the band Wild Earth and used with permission from the artist. Thank you again for giving our podcast a listen. We hope you'll join us for Called Beyond.